Was a part of our worship team this morning. It was Matt. Matt is one of our elders, and also Camille. Thank you for your parts in the earlier section of our worship. Worship again is God's invitation for us to come into His presence, and through His book, He is able to speak to us. I'm going to invite you to the chapter that we're going to read together this morning, and it will form the basis of our sharing from God's Word. It's Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1, again, if you're using this particular Bible, a copy is probably in front of you where you're sitting. It'll be page 625. 625, that is, if you're using this particular one. This version of the Bible is the New International Version, or the NIV. Now remember, every time that we worship, because God is speaking to us, the onus is on us also to listen, but also to take some notes. There's always something that will bless you beyond today. And so as you're listening to me this morning, I encourage you to either use the bulletin or something else that you have access with, and to take notes of our sharing under the title of Commitment in Conviction. I'm going to ask you, and again, I don't know about you, but I do enjoy reading the Bible aloud. So I want you to read this with me. So we're going to read, I will alternate the first 20 verses. The reason why this is good, not only we can hear what we're reading, but it'll give us the big picture of the story, because we only have a limited time just to highlight some key things from the passage. But if we read the story from the Bible, that kind of put us right into the middle of the narrative. So it's the book of Daniel, Old Testament. It's both history and prophecy. It's history and prophecy. For the part that we're reading this morning, it's a history. Now, you may also remember that we were looking at another history book in an earlier period of the history of Israel, the book of Joshua last week. And then you have the period of the Judges. And then following the period of the Judges, in the history of Israel, you have the period of the Kings. So you have the book First King and Second Kings, the Chronicles. And this narrative kind of fit into that period of the Kings. Again, it's page 625, using this particular version of the Bible that you have in front of you. We'll read the first 20 verses. So I'll read the first verse. I'll start with the odd numbers. You will read the even numbers. All right? Is everybody there? Okay. All right. The NIV. Daniel chapter 1. I'm reading verse 1. We will go all the way down to verse 20. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. I hear a lot of sound. Let's kind of read aloud and kind of work ourselves together. All right. I'm reading now verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Well done. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. I am reading verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. I'm reading verse 11. Then Daniel said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, then compare our appearances with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, they look healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. I'm reading verse 19. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. And this is the word of the Lord. Here's our title for today. Commitment in Conviction. And again, thank you to Camille, who introduced or provide a preface to our sharing this morning with the children's feature. I want to make sure that we understand these terms. Both of these terms, again, we started this last week. When we talk about commitment, what do we mean? Commitment is a state or quality of being dedicated to a cause or activity. Commitment is about focusing and pursuing something that you have determined to be important to you. It's a promise or a pledge to do something or to be involved with a cause or with someone. And last week, of course, we looked at the commitment in the area of leadership by Joshua, who said, hey, I've come to the end of my service, and this has been a privilege, but I'm going to challenge you. But I've already made a commitment. In fact, he said, again, you go to the last chapter of Joshua, chapter 24, verse 15, but for me and my house, we will serve God. It was a collective decision to continue to follow the way of God. But here's a new word for us. Kind of similar, but different. Again, it's a noun. And our word for today is conviction. Now, if you look at the title for this month, I've added on that word unshakable commitment. Meaning it's 110%. If there is such a thing, it's 110%. But you know what I'm saying? It's an absolute focus and belief in something that is important to you, very often connected to your values. These are things that you don't see with your eyes, but you know it's there because they breathe life to human behavior. So what we do on the surface level is in informed by what is in the deep level, and these things, as I said, are called values or principles. Read together with me what I've got for you in terms of meaning to conviction in the blue section that I've highlighted for you up on the screen. Everybody, having deeply held unwavering beliefs and principles that guide one's actions, leading to steadfast determination, moral clarity, and the courage to stand by God's truth, even when it's difficult or unpopular. You know that something is right by God, it is right by the community, and you know yourself it is right. But sometimes, because of the context and the moving pieces in life, sometimes that conviction is challenged. Such was the case for our character for today, Daniel. Now, here's our key verse for today. So, looking at the word conviction. This conviction is showed for us in verse 8. So, this is Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. But I've also highlighted other pieces that will inform that conviction. So I'm going to ask you to join with me, and you're going to read with me from the screen, specifically our focus on that chapter. All right? Join me now. This is Daniel chapter 1, verse 5, 8, and 9. Let's read together. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter into the king's service. Our key verse. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and the wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Verse 9, now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, reading the narrative on the surface, may come across that the focus of the chapter is food. And by the way, the specific is food. But behind the food is a conviction. In fact, there's a lot more that we can find in this chapter than food. But there's no question about it. The way of looking at food in that context certainly was a special kind of discipline. We call this discipline conviction. Let me give you the big picture. Remember, this is very important. So I've got, because it's part of history, I've got some names and some dates for us. All right? So in the year 597 BC, to the north of Jerusalem and Judah was the kingdom of Babylon. It was King Nebuchadnezzar II who was the king at the time. He came down to the south and he took siege of the city of Jerusalem, referred to in the Old Testament as the city of David. The city of David. Now, in terms of history, that is Bible history, this was the beginning of what we know as the Babylonian captivity. They were deported, forcefully taken out of their own land, taken north into the kingdom of the Babylonians. They had to leave other people. And we know that they left old people and weak people. People that the conquerors did not see of having any value to them. But they would take the cream, the young, the wise, the educated with them, because this is about kingdom building and they want to take advantage of these people that they have conquered. When you come now to the yellow section of what you see on the screen, and among the exiles were four young men, and we know them as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now here's something very interesting, just for your information, a little side note. In this training in the courts of the king, what conquerors would very often do, not only they will change the names of a people, they will also try to change your way of thinking, to indoctrinate you from their literature and their values and their history. Now, something else that is not mentioned in the text, but I will tell you. Not only did they want to alter their identity, i.e. their names, but they also had to alter physically parts of their bodies. So from this point forward, these young men, and yes, they were men, their sexuality was not changed, but their bodies were changed. They were called eunuchs. That was part of their formal training in the courts. It's an effort to reorient, to reprogram these people according to the wish of this kingdom and the king. It's in this setting where we're reading of the determination or the conviction of a Daniel from his heart not to be reprogrammed according to the wish of the Babylonians, but to be true and faithful to God. I want you now to get a piece of paper, because I'm going to walk you through some very important things beyond food, because the chapter is more than a Daniel diet, as it is referred to very often these days. There's a lot more. It is a story of God working through the lives of a people. So, time to write. Again, very quickly, just to make sure that we have the names of these guys, not their Babylonian names, but their Jewish name. And this is what these names mean for your record. So you can grab a photo of this particular slide. Hananiah means God is merciful. Now, if you think through the story itself, not just this story, but what is recorded for us in the book of Daniel, it's going to be very recognizable. The mercy of God. God is merciful. Key character is Daniel. His name is God is my judge. God will rule on this. Not the world. God will rule on this. Mishael means who is like God? That is a question. Who is a God like this God who saved us from the fire? Who is this God that changed kingdoms and the nations? Who is this God that knows the future? That's the meaning of the name Mishael and Azariah. God is my helper. Let's walk through the text for today. This is Daniel chapter 1. We have some observations of the text. These are things that come out of the text itself. So we don't impose it on the text. It comes out of the text. I'm going to share with you 7 important observations of the text. Setting, it's the Babylonian captivity. God's people were forcefully taken out of their land. But when you look at verse 2, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, here's an interesting insight. God allowed it. God permitted his people to be taken as exiles. That's important because very often in our own journey and in our thinking, when something happens, something bad happens. When something bad happens, we might say, well, maybe we're responsible. And yes, there's a human element to the situation. But this is a statement about the sovereignty of God. God allowed his people to be taken into captivity. Now, of course, we will not have time this morning to look as to why God allowed this to happen. But their failure to follow God's will and God's direction and God's plan for their lives. Started with the king. This is why leadership is important, whether it is the leadership of governments, leadership of community, or leadership of the church. Consequently, because of the failure of leadership and the failure of people collectively, God allowed his people to be taken as captives. Think of your own journey. Maybe think of the journey of the church. Seventh Day Adventist Church. Or maybe our own local congregation. When bad things happen, this could be a consequence of human behavior. But in the big scheme of things, God does allow some of these situations to come. I like to then step forward and say, to help us, to teach us, to mold us, to bring us back to God. Here's a second important thing. I want to talk to young people. So they went to the Royal University of Babylon for 3 years. They did their bachelor's degree, 3 years, in Babylonian literature, language, and culture. That was then. But what about today? I think here's the point. Formal education is necessary. Now, there are some people who will tell you, you don't need to get a degree. You just need to work hard. And I get it. There's a place for perseverance and persistence and hard work. But in the real world, if you want to get anywhere, formal education is necessary. In fact, I will even say it is required. I'm going to suggest to you that the reason why Daniel was able to move up in terms of leadership and responsibility, not only for the Babylonians, but even for the Medes that followed, is because he was educated. He had a degree, or degrees for that matter. And I would like to challenge those of you who are young, who may think less of formal education. There is no substitute for a trained mind. And the same can be said even for those of us who are older. We can still take a course. We can still take a paper. It will only enhance your capacity to influence situations and a people and community and the church. So if you think of not continuing to high school, you need to think again. Daniel is a good example of someone who was open to being trained and to learn, apart from informal education. And all of us, of course, in life, we learn things as we travel on the bus, we go to the market, we observe things. That's informal education. You observe what happens in your home. That's informal education. That has a value. But this story also has something to say about formal education, setting time aside to really train our minds, pushing the limits, if you may. That is, in order to enhance the experience of humans just like us in the world. So formal education is necessary. There's no question that at this time of the life of Daniel, he was a young person. Now I know in many societies, people look down to young people because of their lack of experience. And I know the frustration of young people as well when they applied for jobs. And sometimes they are denied the privilege of working in that situation because they say, but you don't have experience. But here is a statement of affirmation. God works through young people in spite of their lack of experience. God works through them. In fact, there are situations and references in the New Testament where there is a counsel, don't allow older people or senior people to look down on you because you're young. Now, at the same time, the reality is, we need to step up to the plate. We need to show what we're made of. But again, as we look to this particular part of the narrative, God works through people. And I get it. God works through older people. God works through men. God works through women. God works through children. But in this case, God works through young people. And let me assure Pastor, thank you. Many of you are regular in reaching out to young people. Many of you are mentors because you say something encouraging to our young people. Many of you put money aside for our young people and their meetings and activities. Many of you are praying for young people. This is our collective responsibility as a church. Let's be that church that affirms and encourage our young people because they are the church of today and tomorrow. They may never do things perfectly initially, but they will learn, they will get better, and they, like Daniel, can be used of God. Observation number 4. Now, this is kind of the heart of the matter. Something simple, food, drinks. And yet, in that situation, when they were pushed to eat something that they were not familiar with, maybe they never had it in their families because these are Jewish young people. Maybe we need to pick up on something simple that you and I understand. They don't eat pork. And I would imagine there may have been something on that table which was the requirement of the king. Food. And you may say, not too important. And yet, according to the text, verse 8, Daniel was determined to demonstrate his conviction that he's not going to change his diet suddenly because of the expectation of the king and the requirement of the university. He was determined because he established those values already in his family. I would imagine that he was taught well at home. In fact, Ellen White makes a statement about the value of that home education. That's how Daniel and his friends were trained. So they had in the deep level, as I referenced before, those values that when it came to push, those values dictate their behavior. It was informed by those values that were taught in Scripture and taught in the home. From the heart. Conviction is important. You believe in something, then you will live it. You believe in something, you will speak about it. You believe in something that it ought to be the guide in your life, whether you are at home or abroad. Conviction is important, and God is looking for people of conviction. What is your conviction? Conviction about your identity as a Seventh Day Adventist Church member. Conviction as a follower of a Jesus. Not allowing the situation and the pressure to take you aside or push you back. Conviction matters. Because it's who you are. So continue to look at the story. And as I said, this is really the story of God. At the beginning of the chapter, God allowed his people to take into captivities. And yet in captivity, when Daniel was talking to the head of the king's court, who was in charge of them, here's the word that you find there in verse 9. And God showed favor. Meaning, God was working in the mix. God did not leave his people just because they were in exile. God stayed with them. God intervened at the right time. Let me ask you, in the challenges of life that you're going through right now, do you see the hand of God? Do you see the intervention of God? Do you see the grace of God even in the chaos of our environment? Is God with you? Do you feel his presence? Because he is present everywhere with us. In good times and in bad times. When we are healthy and when we are sick. When we are alone and when we are with people. God is present with us always, including times of trials. Number 6. If you have a conviction, don't be silent. If you see something that is done in your context that does not align with your values, speak up. There are so many things that are challenging our Christian values in the world today. Things that we hear, things that we see on television, it challenges who we are. We cannot be passive. If you're convicted, speak up. If your values inform you otherwise, speak up. And so in this conversation between Daniel and the head of the king's court, he said, I know your life may be in jeopardy. I know that your life may be at risk because you're not following the rules. But I'm also telling you, this is my conviction and my belief. And be smart when you speak up. He said, give us a period to try this thing out. Give us a time for a trial. But the point that I'm conveying to all of us, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you're convicted about something, don't be silent. Speak up. Because God has called you to be his voice. Particularly for difficult times and situations. When those things are in conflict with our values as followers of a Jesus. Number 7. God rewards the faithful. Faithful in terms of your conviction. God will honor you because you spoke up. God will honor you because you walk the talk. God will honor you when you leave that life that expects of you as a disciple and follower of a Jesus. Daniel chapter 1 is more than just a test about food. It is an illustration of how conviction works in real life and in real time. Here's the question. Would you be a Daniel in these times? Would you defy the norms of society because you recognize that God has called you for such a time as this? I want to close now with this powerful statement by Ellen White from the book Education. Some of you may have heard this statement before, but it is a statement that was written in the context of the story of Daniel and the story of Joseph. Again, this is Education, page 57. Listen as I read to you, powerful statement, one of the pioneers of the Adventist faith. The history of Joseph and Daniel is an illustration of what he, that is God, what he will do for those who yield themselves to him and with the whole heart seek to accomplish his purpose. God has a purpose for your life. God has a purpose for my life, just like he had a purpose for Daniel. And here comes that powerful statement. The greatest want of the world is the want of a man, and may I add women. The want of people, men and women who will not be bought or sold. Men and women who in their innermost souls are true and honest. Men and women whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole. Men and women who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. A lot of things that are happening in this country, I know for me, are in conflict with my own values. Would I have the conviction to speak up? Would I have the conviction to stand for those principles? Even if the pressure is on. The greatest want of the world is the want of men and women who are true to their conviction as led by God always.